Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 138. Hitoshi lost count of how many times he had become intimately acquainted with the taste of the mat covering the floor of the gym. But here he was, again, with a face full of rubber or whatever the heck this stuff was made out of. He had a half a mind to stay there. He would be here again in a matter of seconds. Why bother getting up? He didn't even realize that he had let out a pained groan until he heard a laugh puffed out from above him. He scrambled up quickly after that. "Why don't we pause for lunch? You look like you could use a break," Aizawa stated flatly. Hitoshi did his best to keep the unending gratitude off his face as he nodded in agreement, though the pleased smirk on his sensei's face told him his efforts were mildly successful at best. This man was a sadist. Hitoshi was sure of it. He missed yesterday's training, where his biggest threat was accidentally hanging himself while trying to use his capture weapon like Aizawa did. Aizawa left the room, and Hitoshi assumed he was off to eat lunch in the teacher's lounge or wherever it was that he usually ate. So he didn't think twice about laying down on the ground next to his stuff for a while before grabbing his bento. He just needed to catch his breath and verify that his limbs weren't broken. He laid there, staring at the ceiling for a while and vowed to never get on Eraserhead's bad side. His musings were interrupted by the gym doors opening, and Hitoshi was surprised to see Aizawa returning with his own bento. The lower half of his face was hidden behind his scarf, but he could have sworn he saw the gleam of a smirk in his eyes when he spotted Hitoshi plastered pathetically to the ground. Yeah, definitely a sadist. It's ill-advised to eat while lying down, he quipped as he took a seat next to him. It's ill-advised to kill children, and yet he found himself poking back before he could think better of it. You're mouthy for a corpse, Aizawa replied rather than reprimanding him. Hitoshi bit back on a laugh and stayed sprawled out on the ground while Aizawa started to eat. He'd been saying sarcastic little jokes like that all day, and Hitoshi had gradually started to understand Aizawa more and more. He was still bizarre and damn near impossible to read, but at least he was funny. He kind of reminded him of Midoriya. A little too mysterious, quick-witted, and even quicker on his feet, though Midoriya was far less brutal in his training. Shoto watched Shinso out of the corner of his eye as he laid on the floor. He had his eyes closed, but his breathing hadn't evened out in the way that it would if he had fallen asleep, so he let him be for now. He could see how he and Midoriya would have been friends. They had the same dry, sarcastic sense of humor, and his damn near boundless determination reminded him of when he first started sparring with Ivy. He was considering prodding the kid upright when he got up on his own accord and fished out a bento from his bag. Sitting down and eating with someone like this reminded him of rooftops in a way that made his heart ache for several reasons. For several people he didn't think he was ever going to get back at this rate. The wild, gravity-defying hair of his student didn't help matters. Those nighttime rooftops with Ivy were in the past, and the bright daylight rooftops with Oboro were even further buried. He pushed away the unhelpful comparisons and brought his mind back to the matter at hand. He needed to get information on Shinso and Midoriya's relationship, so he started out with an innocuous question. You said you had training before. Where did you learn? Shoto asked casually. I was part of a local dojo. The one on Block 40. Shinso trailed off. It sounded like he wanted to say more, but he stopped himself, so Shoto just waited and hoped that the uncomfortable silence would encourage Shinso to continue. I also learned from Midoriya. He taught me the basics and told me to join a dojo. Shinso rewarded his patience with a convenient segue. How long did you two work together? He probed for more information. I knew him for a couple years before we only worked on martial arts for a few months, like maybe 5, usually only once a week. That was a good timeline, but he needed more than that. You two were close then? He pushed. It was certainly out of character for him to ask about a student's personal life, but he was hoping Shinso didn't know him well enough to pick up on that yet. Yeah, we were pretty close. He used to come into the library my mom works at. He was there most days. So his mother was involved too. That was, well, that was good and bad. Good that there was an adult he could question, but bad that there was another person he had to drag into this. How many people was Midoriya hiding from? Have you two reconciled with whatever happened at the beginning of the year? The surprised look on Shinso's face told him that he was pushing his luck with that question. Oh, that. Um, no, not really. He needed to veer this back into his lane. He was his teacher. He shouldn't be poking into things not related to his student's education. It's only a matter of time before you two get teamed up in class. Is that going to pose an issue? A faint blush spread across Shinso's cheeks. That probably sounded like a reprimand, which was not his intention, but if it got him information, he wasn't about to correct it. No, we can work together. It's not a problem. You glare at the back of his head every day. He interrupted the lie before Shinso got the chance to finish it. He clamped his mouth shut and turned his gaze down to his lap. I told you at the beginning of the year, if this feud affects your education, then it becomes my problem as well. You spend more time glaring at him than you do looking at the board. Your grades aren't an issue, but they could be better if you paid proper attention. He made an attempt to reel back the ridicule, but he's not sure how successful he was. I'm sorry, Sensei. I don't need an apology. You're a good student. I already told you your grades are fine. However, if they could be better, then I would like to resolve the situation. It's my job to oversee your education. If this is a hurdle for you, I'd like to help you get past it if I'm able, he clarified. But I can't do that if I don't have more information, he added. Shinso took a moment to mull over what he had said. He looked like he wanted to explain, but he was just looking for the words to say it, so Shoto waited patiently. We were friends for about 2 years, like I said. He came into the library, and I did online school there, so I saw him at least 4 days a week. We weren't usually there on weekends, and he wasn't there on Tuesdays. He used to come over to my house for dinner once a week, too, and that's when we'd practice together. We didn't, we never talked about quirks, at least not our own. I didn't tell him mine, and, well, he found out, and at first it was fine, but then he started acting all scared of me, and eventually he told me that he was moving to America. I never saw him or heard from him again until the first day of class. That was like last April, so over a year ago now. But obviously, he never left. He lied to me, Shinso explained reluctantly. Have you tried talking to him? Yeah, I talked to him the first day. He just apologized and refused to explain. He said he wasn't scared of me, but he was obviously lying again, so I told him to leave me alone until he had an explanation, and we haven't really talked since. He did his best to keep his face neutral through the whole explanation, but it felt like someone had twisted a knife in his heart. Last April was when Midoriya's cat died. It looked like it had been shot. And if the kid had lived in that staircase, then the people they were looking for that night were probably looking for him. Midoriya's throwing knife target wasn't very well hidden from the opening in the wall. If you stood at the right angle, you could see it from outside. And if that cat didn't distract whoever was snooping around, then they very well could have found his camp and waited until he got back from patrol. They could have shot him in that dark stairwell, and more likely than not, his body would never have been found. Midoriya probably put those pieces together too. He knew they were after him and that they were getting close. Did he cut ties to anyone else so that they wouldn't get hurt? Or was he right about his first hypothesis? He cut them off because they were getting too close to figuring out his home situation. The timing seemed too conspicuous. The cat had to be the catalyst, right? He needed more concrete dates to know for sure. He could check with Tsukashi on the report for when he turned that gun in. It had been the day after he had taken it from Midoriya, but he couldn't get a date from Shinso without being incredibly suspicious. Did he even need the date? Did it matter to the investigation which came first? Or was that just his own concern and morbid curiosity talking? Do you know why he was out last week? Is he all right? Shinso asked, pulling him from his thoughts. Yes, I know why he was out, he replied in a forced, level tone. Are you sure? I mean, did you just get an email or did you actually talk to his mom? Shinso pressed. That certainly piqued his interest. He raised his brow and looked over to Shinso, who was picking at his nails and not looking up at him. He knew something, didn't he? Why? He asked rather than answering. He said, I heard from someone else that he said that it was a family issue. I just wanted to know if everything was all right. But I guess I could just ask him. No. You specifically asked if his mother had talked to us. Why? Shoto interrupted his backpedaling. Shinso looked very uncomfortable with the line of questioning, and Shoto knew that was for a reason. He needed to know that reason. I never met his mom, but there was this one time he came into the library and he was really sick. He must have had a fever because he was kind of loose-lipped. I asked him what he was doing there, and he said he had to email his school from a fake email because his mom wouldn't call him in. And there was another time where we were together and, he said that his mom was out of the country and he was home alone. I think he's alone a lot, but he said he had someone checking in on him pretty consistently, a family friend that taught him how to fight. So, he had to see him pretty regularly for him to have gotten that good. We kept an eye on him too, but we never really had anything we could have reported to anyone, so we just did the best we could. And now he was out again, so I was worried that something happened, Shinso explained all in one breath. That was a lot to take in. So Midoriya had been using him as a scapegoat for the Shinsos. He tried his best not to feel guilty about that. If he hadn't been there, then Midoriya would have just come up with another lie. Some messed up part of his brain felt better knowing that he wasn't the only adult in the kid's life that had failed him so spectacularly. Shinso-san had some type of mind-reading quirk, didn't she? And he was still able to evade her notice, so maybe he wasn't such a failure. No, none of this should be taking his focus away from the investigation. He was too close to all of this, but there wasn't a better alternative. He had to do what he had to do. So, do you know what happened? You're sure? Shinso interrupted his train of thought for a second time. Yes, I'm sure. Midoriya is fine. He cut himself off, saying he was fine now gave too much away. I saw to it personally. You don't need to worry about him, he assured. Shinso looked at him critically, studying his face for any hint that he wasn't being fully truthful, but thankfully, he didn't push the matter. Whether or not that was due to Shoto's poker face or the fact that Shinso realized he didn't have any business snooping around further was impossible to say, but he hoped it was the former. All Might had already gone poking his nose into Midoriya's business, and the poor kid didn't need anyone else prodding him for information. It was good that they cared, but he was going through a lot already. The joint patrol with Shoto and Endeavor was stunted both socially and physically. Burnin did most of the talking for the group, and walking around with Endeavor collected a crowd no matter how hard he glared at them. He dismissed them briskly most of the time, but the group of middle schoolers that seemed to be on their way home either did not pick up on the fact that Endeavor wanted nothing to do with them, or they ignored it. Either way, it was kind of funny. Burnin was signing notebooks and doing her best to play damage control for Endeavor's poor social skills. Endeavor was trying to shake off the gaggle of tweens, and one of the kids was talking to Todoroki about his quirk. So they were all pretty occupied. He didn't blame them for not noticing what was going on the other side of the tracks. A man, standing there waiting for a train, had tensed up the moment they walked into the station. So Izuku had been keeping an eye on him. He didn't look overly suspicious, just some businessman, though he was out early for someone Izuku assumed to be a 9-to-5er. It was only 3 o'clock. He kept glancing over at Endeavor and their groups, so Izuku hid himself behind a pillar so that he could keep watch without being noticed. They couldn't take him in for acting suspicious, and he wasn't going to pull anything if he knew the number 2 hero was watching him. So Izuku would wait until he acted. His plan rewarded him. Endeavor was turning to leave the station in an attempt to ditch the entourage, and Izuku could feel a breeze coming down the tunnel as a train barreled into the station. The man's face twisted painfully, and he sent another glance toward Endeavor, making sure his back was turned before he stepped forward, his foot deliberately catching on a warped floor panel. He started falling onto the tracks, and Izuku could see the train's lights breaching the tunnel. Time froze, and Izuku bolted after the man as fast as he could manage. With a flash of green sparks and a gust of wind, he vaulted over the gap and tackled the man back onto the station floor. He felt the train clip his boot as they tumbled to the ground. That was too close. He could hear people screaming, but he ignored it. His focus was on the man he had pinned to the ground beneath him. His breaths were ragged as he squirmed out from Izuku's grasp and curled in on himself. He was breathing. He was alive. He was hiding his face from everyone as he cried. He had to get him out of here. An audience was not what he needed right now. Unfortunately for both of them, Izuku had an audience of his own. "Jade, are you all right?" He heard Burnin's voice come from above. She had flown over the top of the train. Endeavor and Todoroki were still on the other side, but he figured that wouldn't last for long. "Yes, we're both fine. I've got the situation handled," he said with confidence, hoping that it would be enough to communicate that she should leave. It was not enough. And just as he had suspected, Todoroki came climbing over the top of the train less than a second later. There was fear in his eyes that settled when they met Izuku's. He nodded at him to let him know that he was fine, just in case he hadn't heard him answer Burnin. Endeavor flew over the top of the train as well. To the average citizen, it would have been quick, but Izuku knew he was faster than that. He had taken his time to check on the situation, and it made Izuku sick. Jade knew how to handle himself, but Endeavor didn't know that. He was letting a petty grudge against a 15-year-old get in the way of his work. Seconds made all the difference in heroics, and his laissez-faire attitude could have been the difference between life and death. He stomped down his observations. Now wasn't the time. Shoto, try to melt that panel flat if you can, he instructed, and returned his focus to the civilian in front of him. Hopefully the order would tell people watching that this had been an accident, not a suicide attempt. Of course, it had been a suicide attempt, but the judgment that hung heavy in the air wasn't helping anyone, so he did his best to dismiss it. Let's get you out of here, sir. He spoke to the man gently. The man didn't react. He just stayed there where he was on the dirty ground, curled up on himself, painfully tight. Izuku bit his lip and gently rested his hand on the man's back. He needed time, so Izuku gave it to him. He sat on the ground next to him and rubbed soothing circles between his shoulder blades until his trembling settled down and his limbs slackened. He was still crying, but he seemed more present, so he tried to get his attention again. Sir, let's get you out of here. Can you stand? He asked quietly. His question seemed to prompt the man to remember where he was, and Izuku felt the muscles between his hand tense up again. It's all right. Let me help you up. I'm sure you don't want an audience right now. Let's go somewhere else. At that, the man shakily obeyed. He got up to unsteady feet and allowed Izuku to usher him out of the station and away from the prying eyes that inhabited it. He ignored Endeavor pulling Shoto away, and he ignored Burnin perching herself on the roof behind where he got the man to sit down. The man tried to deny what had happened, but Izuku didn't let him. It didn't help anyone to feign ignorance. It took a while, but eventually the man dropped his denials and told him that his name was Hiraoka Michi. Izuku sat with him until he broke down for a second time, and he listened as the man told him that he had been let go, how his family had fallen on hard times, and he couldn't find a new job. He told him how he knew there was a security camera in the station, and he hoped his life insurance would be enough for his family to pay rent for long enough for his wife to find employment or marry someone else who wasn't such a failure. He listened while Hiraoka-san called himself an idiot, how he knew the plan was stupid, but he was just so damn tired. Izuku knew how he felt. Hiraoka-san already knew he shouldn't have done what he did. He didn't need coddling. He needed the truth. So Izuku gave it to him. There's food pantries all over town. The government has programs that can help you provide for your family. Libraries are a great resource. They can help you find pantries and shelters if things come to that. It's not enough, but it's something. No amount of money is ever going to make up for your absence. You are invaluable, and giving up is not an option. Not when you have a family. They need you just as much as they need food on the table and a roof over their heads, he insisted with a gently firm tone. Guilt pulled at the man's expression, and Izuku did his best to focus on that and not his own experiences of family letting him down. It was different. They didn't. No, not now, Izuku. He didn't think that Hiraoka-san would try that again. The remorse was evident, but he still couldn't just leave him here to his own devices. Call your wife and let her know when you'll be home, he instructed when the man made no move to respond to him. He looked up with a furrowed brow, but he didn't reach for his phone. I can't leave you here with nothing keeping you from trying that again. Call your wife. She'll be expecting you home. You won't let her down, he insisted. The guilty look on his face only deepened, but he obeyed this time. Izuku stayed and listened to the conversation to make sure that he didn't try to back out. Tears fell from the man's eyes as he spoke to his wife, but he didn't let it color his tone, like he didn't want to worry her. That didn't sit right with Izuku. When he ended the call, he walked them over to the street and hailed a cab. He wasn't supposed to do this, but he paid for his fare with his student transit pass, and the man looked about ready to cry again at the gesture. Talk to your wife. You aren't alone in this. She's your partner for a reason, isn't she? He said before Hiraoka-san took his seat in the cab. I don't want to worry her. You were ready to make her grieve half an hour ago, Hiraoka-san. Talking to her won't hurt her more than that would have. Izuku cut him off quickly. It was harsh, but it's what he needed to hear. Hiraoka-san nodded as guilt pulled at his features again. He knew what he needed to do, and Izuku couldn't do anything but trust that he would see it through. He watched as he got into the cab, and it drove him away. He kept watching it until it was out of sight. The footsteps behind him didn't startle him because he knew she had been there the entire time. Burnin gently laid a hand on his shoulder before she spoke. You handled that like a pro, she praised solemnly. He had been worried that she didn't have the tact to deal with things like this, but her tone surprised him. She sounded like she was yelling most of the time, but that's just the way she spoke. It was nice to hear an inside voice. It made her sound like a real person. He wondered how much of her personality was a persona, but that wasn't important right now, so he discarded it quickly. Thanks, he answered in the same melancholic tone. Are you all right? He smiled sadly as he turned around. Yeah, I'm fine, he assured her. She studied his face intently, as if looking for a way to disprove his statement, but she didn't find anything. He was as okay as he ever was. He'd seen and been through situations far worse than that one. It was sad, but not enough to really rattle him. Let's break for lunch. It's well overdue. Then I can show you the wonderful world of incident reports, she joked, though her volume was still respectfully low. Oh, joy! He shot back sarcastically and started walking in the direction of Endeavor's agency. He heard Burnin snort out a laugh behind him. The interaction reminded him so much of working with a racer that it hurt to think about. He filed that moment away quickly. Here and now. Focus on the here and now, Izuku. The rest of the day followed without much fanfare. They rejoined Endeavor and Shoto after lunch, and incidents were minimal. They did their paperwork on it and went back to the Todoroki household for a second time. Dinner was similarly awkward, but he thought he was starting to get the hang of things. Conversation flowed smoothly enough, and he was pretty sure he was the only one who was feeling awkward about it. He could only hope that he did a good job of hiding it. Just like yesterday, Todoroki was ushered into the training room with his father, leaving Izuku to his own devices. So, against his wishes, he was doing his homework at the Todoroki family dining table. He had caught Fuyumi here last night, and he was hoping he would be able to catch Natsu in a conversation as well. There wasn't anything productive he could do while Todoroki was training with his father. Any lurking would be noticed through the translucent shoji walls, so he planned to plant a bug to oversee tomorrow night's training session. Thankfully, it didn't take too long before Natsu walked into the room to get to the kitchen and sent a nod of greeting toward Izuku as he went. Izuku sent one back and steeled himself. He had to get Natsu to sit down and talk with him, and given the sneers he had seen aimed at Endeavor, he had a feeling he knew how to do that. When Natsu walked back out of the kitchen with the water bottle he had presumably just filled, Izuku spoke up. Do you know when Todoroki will be done training? He asked. Natsu's face twisted into an expression of anger for a split second before he schooled himself. They're usually at it for hours. I wouldn't wait up. That seems a bit excessive, Izuku baited. Natsu didn't seem like he would turn down an opportunity to shit-talk the old man, and Izuku was all too happy to provide. It is. The man's insane and obsessive, he bit out. Well, that was far easier than he had expected it to be. No love lost with you, he joked. He just hummed ruefully in response. Explains the startling lack of number 2 dad mugs in the cupboard. Izuku tried again. Natsu probably burst out laughing at that, and Izuku couldn't help the smile creeping up his cheeks. Gah! I would get one of those for him in a second if it wouldn't get me beat, Natsu said once he got his laughter under control. Just like he had with Fuyumi, he didn't want to make this conversation seem like an interrogation. He had to give something in return. Humor seemed to be getting him on far enough with Natsu, so he figured that was a safe road to travel. I'd get one for my dad, too, but he's been at the store for 7 years, so might take a while. It was only half true, but it was still funny. It wasn't funny when kids had jeered at him in middle school, but there was a kind of power in reclaiming the joke. Natsu did a poor job of concealing his laugh. I see why you and Shoto hit it off. Yeah, we're co-founders of the UA Shitty Dad Club, he replied. He bit his lip when he realized he'd just let out a curse word. Hopefully Natsu didn't care. He didn't seem like the type to care, but he was looking at Izuku with a surprised expression and a raised brow. You know, Fuyumi described you as a very polite young man, he shot back dryly. A blush spread across Izuku's cheeks. He couldn't talk like that here. This wasn't uptown, and Izuku was led to believe that fancy rich people don't curse, or at least they weren't supposed to. It wasn't proper. I contain multitudes, he defended weakly. Natsu scoffed out another laugh before taking his leave, shooting an unconvinced sounding "got it" over his shoulder as he walked away. Well, that wasn't as much as he had been hoping to get from him, but at least he had a glowing character review from all of Endeavor's children now. It hardly made the case, but it would certainly help it on the condition that he got more concrete evidence. He cringed at what more concrete evidence entailed. He didn't know what was going on behind the closed doors of the training room, but he had a feeling that was where he was going to get his evidence. He'd plant the bug tonight. The doors held themselves a bit off the floor, just enough for the pen to fit nestled under them. He hadn't seen the inside of the training room, but he figured it was just as sparsely decorated as every other room in the house, so he couldn't count on being able to hide anything in there. What he could do was tape the pen to the underside of the door. It would be small enough to not impede its function, and Izuku doubted either of them would look closely enough to spot it. This was going to work. Whether it caught evidence or not, well, Izuku didn't know what to hold out hope for. End of chapter.